Detective Jameson rolled his eyes as the teenage girl sitting across from him continued her desperate plea. "I'm telling you, my mom is missing, and it's not normal. She would never disappear like this." The detective sighed, tapping his pen against the incident report form that remained mostly empty. 3 days wasn't long enough to classify someone as missing, especially an adult with no signs of foul play. But the precinct had a slow afternoon, and Captain Reynolds had asked him to at least hear the kid out. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "Look, Sophia," Detective Jameson said, checking his notes to confirm her name. "Adults sometimes need space. They go away for a weekend, clear their heads. Your mom probably just needed a break." Sophia Parker leaned forward, her 17-year-old face a mask of frustration and fear. "You don't understand. My mom isn't like that. She has routines, protocols. If she's going to be away, she leaves detailed instructions. Always." The girl's voice cracked slightly. "And she always answers my texts within 4 hours. Always. It's been 3 days." Jameson had heard similar stories countless times in his 15 years on the force. Worried family members convinced something terrible had happened when the explanation was usually simple and boring. A spontaneous trip with a new boyfriend. A few too many drinks and a lost phone. Sometimes, sadly, people just walked away from their lives. "Your mom is... what did you say she does again?" He glanced down at his nearly blank form. "A consultant?" "Security consultant," Sophia corrected, her jaw tightening. "But before that, she was Special Forces Army. She served for 6 years. Jameson couldn't help the smirk that formed on his face. "Special Forces? Your mom?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop as Sophia's eyes narrowed. "Yes, my mom. Look, kid. I'm not trying to be rude here, but women don't serve in Special Forces. That's not how the military works." He'd served 8 years in the Marines before joining the police. He knew how things operated. "You don't believe me." It wasn't a question. "I believe you're worried about your mom," Jameson said, softening his tone. "But let's stick to the facts, okay? Tell me about her normal routine, her friends, any places she might go if she needed time alone." The girl's expression hardened. "The fact is, my mother was one of the first women to complete Ranger training. The fact is, she earned 2 Bronze Stars for valor in combat. The fact is, something is wrong, and you're wasting time because you think I'm making up stories." Jameson sighed. Kids and their imaginations. Sophia's mother was probably an army desk jockey at best, and the girl had built up some fantasy about her mom being G.I. Jane. "When was the last time you actually saw your mother?" he asked, trying to get back on track. "Monday morning. She made breakfast, checked the security system like she always does, and left for work at 7:15. She texted me at 12:30 to say she was heading into a meeting. That was the last I heard from her." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jameson noted the precise times. Typical teenager behavior, dramatizing everything. "And where does she work again?" "Sterling Security Solutions." Sophia pulled out her phone and showed him the website. They provide security for high-risk clients, mostly overseas. Former military personnel. The detective glanced at the slick corporate website, showing squared-away men in tactical gear. It looked legitimate enough. Private security was big business these days. "Have you contacted her workplace?" "They said she's on assignment and unavailable. But that's not normal either. She always tells me when she has an assignment, and she always maintains communication protocols." The word protocols again. This kid watched too many spy movies. "Maybe this assignment came up suddenly," Jameson suggested. Maybe she couldn't tell you the details. Then she would have used our emergency code system, Sophia insisted. A specific emoji sequence in her text that tells me she's okay but can't talk. There's been nothing. Jameson fought the urge to roll his eyes again. Secret emoji codes? This was getting ridiculous. All right, look, he said, closing his notepad. Here's what we'll do. I'll take down the information, file a report. If your mom doesn't turn up in the next 48 hours, we can escalate this to a missing persons case. In the meantime, is there someone you can stay with? A grandparent, aunt, family friend. I'm staying with Mrs. Reeves next door. She has my mom's emergency contact information. At least the kid wasn't home alone. That was something. Good, that's good. Jameson stood up, signaling the end of the interview. Try not to worry too much. Adults sometimes need space. You said that already. Sophia gathered her backpack, her movements precise and controlled. Too controlled for a typical teenager. You're making a mistake, detective. My mother is not just missing. She's in danger. The certainty in her voice gave Jameson pause, but only briefly. He'd dealt with hundreds of missing persons cases. Most resolved themselves within days. I'll walk you out, he said, reaching for the door. One more thing, Sophia said, turning back. When my mom does come back, and she will, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember how you laughed when I told you who she is. The intensity in the girl's eyes was unsettling. For a brief moment, Jameson wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was more to Elena Parker than met the eye. I'll remember, he promised, though he didn't expect to think about this case again after today. He was wrong. 3 days later, Detective Jameson was nursing his second cup of coffee when Captain Reynolds dropped a file on his desk. That Parker case you took the other day? The missing mom? Jameson nodded, surprised the captain even remembered it. What about it? I just got a call from the FBI. They want all our information on Elena Parker. Jameson's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. The FBI? Why would they? Apparently, Ms. Parker is not just a security consultant. She's former military intelligence with specialized training. And now she's missing. The detective's mind flashed back to Sophia's insistence about her mother's background. The daughter mentioned something about special forces, but you thought she was exaggerating, Reynolds finished for him. Well, somebody thinks Parker's important enough to involve federal agents. They're sending someone over this afternoon. As the captain walked away, Jameson pulled up the incident report he'd filed. It was embarrassingly sparse. He'd been dismissive, condescending even, treating Sophia's concerns as teenage dramatics. If Elena Parker really was former military intelligence, and if something had happened to her, he reached for his phone. He needed to speak with Sophia again, this time taking her seriously. Before he could dial, the precinct's front desk called. Detective Jameson? There's someone here to see you about the Parker case. The FBI agent? They're early. Not FBI, the desk sergeant replied. It's the daughter, Sophia Parker. And she's brought someone with her. Jameson headed to the front desk, rehearsing an apology in his mind. When he rounded the corner, he saw Sophia standing in the waiting area, her posture as rigid as it had been in his office. But it was the woman beside her that made him stop mid-stride. She stood about 5'7", with an athletic build evident even under her civilian clothes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and though she wasn't visibly armed, something about her screamed, dangerous. Her eyes scanned the room continuously, cataloging exits, angles, potential threats. Detective Jameson, Sophia said with cold formality. This is my aunt, Margaret Sterling. She'd like to discuss my mother's case with you. The name registered immediately, Sterling, like Sterling Security Solutions, where Elena Parker worked. Margaret Sterling extended her hand, and when Jameson took it, Her grip was like iron. "Detective, is there somewhere we can speak privately?" Her voice was calm, measured, but there was an undercurrent of authority that made the request sound like an order. "Of course, this way." Another document followed. After leaving the military, she joined my company, Sterling Security Solutions, where she serves as a senior operative specializing in high-risk extraction and protection details. Margaret's eyes never left Jameson's face as she continued. "Elena is not only my employee, she's my friend. And Sophia is right, she would never go dark without following established protocols unless something had gone catastrophically wrong." Jameson swallowed hard. Everything Sophia had told him was true. He'd dismissed her concerns because he couldn't imagine a woman in special forces couldn't imagine a mother being that kind of warrior. "I apologize for not taking this more seriously," he said, looking at Sophia. "The FBI has contacted us about your mother. They're sending someone this afternoon." "We know," Margaret said. "In fact, we're counting on their resources. But we're not waiting for them to arrive." She spread out a map of the county, pointing to the industrial complex she'd mentioned. "We have intelligence suggesting Elena was tracking members of a domestic terror cell operating in this area. The cell has connections to international weapons dealers and may be planning an attack on critical infrastructure." Jameson stared at the map, then back at Margaret Sterling. This was way beyond his pay grade. "Miss Sterling, if this is true, we need to contact Homeland Security. Bring in a tactical team." "All being arranged," she cut him off. "But time is critical. Elena may have discovered something that made her a target. We need to move now, before they relocate her or worse." The implication hung in the air. Worse. If these people were terrorists, worse could mean many things, none of them good. "What do you need from me?" Jameson asked, his earlier skepticism replaced by grim understanding. "Local knowledge and official cover," Margaret replied. "I have a team assembled, but we need someone who knows the area and can liaise with local authorities if things get complicated." Jameson nodded slowly. "The Westridge complex is in my jurisdiction. I know it well, but I can't authorize a private military operation on American soil." "We're not asking for authorization," Sophia spoke up, her young voice steady. "We're offering you the chance to help save my mother's life." The detective looked at the teenager with new respect. The confidence, the controlled emotion, she'd learned it from her mother, a woman who had served in combat zones and now worked in private security. "I'll need to inform my captain," Jameson said. "Already done," Margaret replied. "Captain Reynolds has known Elena for years. They served together before he joined the police force. He's the one who suggested we speak with you directly." Jameson felt like he'd stepped into an alternate reality. His captain knew about this, had connections to a woman with Special Forces background who now worked in what appeared to be a high-level security operation. "There's a briefing in 20 minutes, Margaret continued, gathering her materials. "We'll provide everything you need to know about the operation. If you're in, be at this address." She handed him a card with an address written on the back. "If not, we understand." But either way, this conversation never happened. As they stood to leave, Sophia lingered behind for a moment. "You didn't believe me," she said quietly. "You thought I was just some dramatic teenager." Jameson met her gaze. "I was wrong. I'm sorry. My mom taught me that when someone apologizes, you should accept it graciously," Sophia said. "But she also taught me that some mistakes cost lives. Don't make any more mistakes today, detective." With that, she turned and followed Margaret out of the room, leaving Jameson with a map, an address, and the uncomfortable realization that he'd badly misjudged both the situation and the people involved. 20 minutes later, Jameson pulled up to what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. He checked the address again, wondering if he'd made a wrong turn. Then he noticed the discreet security cameras positioned at strategic points around the building. This was the place. As he approached the entrance, a voice came through an intercom. "Detective Jameson. Hands visible. Please approach the door slowly." The heavy metal door slid open to reveal a surprisingly modern interior. What looked like a derelict warehouse from outside was a fully equipped tactical operations center inside. Multiple computer stations, communications equipment, weapons racks, and a central planning table where several people were gathered around a holographic display. Margaret Sterling nodded at his arrival. "Detective, glad you could join us." Jameson recognized some of the faces around the table, former military types, with the hard eyes and watchful posture of people who'd seen combat. But there were others he couldn't place, a man who looked more like a university professor than a soldier, a woman whose fingers flew across 3 keyboards simultaneously, and in the corner, Sophia Parker, studying a tablet with intense concentration. "Should she be here?" Jameson asked Margaret quietly, nodding toward the teenager. "Sophia has been trained for this since she could walk," Margaret replied. "Elena made sure her daughter could handle herself in any situation. Besides, she knows her mother's patterns and protocols better than anyone. She's an asset." An asset? They were talking about a 17-year-old girl. Before Jameson could process this further, the holographic display changed to show a detailed 3D rendering of the Westridge Industrial Complex. "All right, listen up," Margaret addressed the room. "Our intelligence indicates Elena was conducting surveillance here at the main manufacturing facility." A section of the hologram highlighted in red. "Her last transmission came at 2,200 hours 3 days ago, reporting movement of suspected arms dealers entering the complex. She was going to get closer, gather more intel. Then nothing. A man who introduced himself only as Park stepped forward. Thermal imaging from our drone shows activity in these 3 buildings." More sections lit up on the display. At least 8 heat signatures in the main facility, 4 in the storage warehouse, and 2 in what used to be the administrative building. "Any sign of Elena?" someone asked. "Nothing conclusive," Park replied. "The main building has several sub-basement levels that our sensors can't penetrate. If they're holding her, that's where she'd be." "What about police or FBI involvement?" Jameson asked, trying to understand his role in all this. Margaret turned to him. "Official channels are moving too slowly. By the time they assemble a task force and get proper authorization, Elena could be dead or moved to another location. We're proceeding with a private extraction operation, but having you along gives us some legitimacy if questions arise later." Jameson frowned. "You're asking me to participate in what sounds like an illegal military operation on U.S. soil. We're asking you to help rescue an American citizen who has information vital to national security," Margaret countered. "Everything else is just semantics." The room fell silent as everyone turned to Jameson. He looked around at the assembled team, at their professional demeanor and obvious expertise. These weren't vigilantes or thrill seekers. They were trained operatives with a clear mission. His eyes found Sophia, who was watching him with an expression that reminded him painfully of his own daughter. What would he want someone to do if it was his child's mother in danger? "All right," he said finally, "but I go in with you. And at the first sign that this is anything other than a rescue operation, I'm calling it in." Margaret nodded. "Fair enough." Park briefed the detective on the approach and entry plan. "Wheels up in 30 minutes. As the group dispersed to prepare, Jameson found himself standing next to Sophia. The teenager was checking what appeared to be a communications device, her movements efficient and practiced. "You were right about your mom," he said quietly. "I should have listened." Sophia didn't look up from her work. "My mom says people see what they expect to see. You saw a housewife who couldn't possibly be a warrior, a mother who couldn't be a soldier. And what do you see? Jameson asked. Now she looked up, her eyes surprisingly old for her young face. I see my mom. The woman who taught me to shoot when I was 8. Who makes me practice escape routes from every building we enter. Who checks the perimeter of our house twice a day, every day. A small, proud smile touched her lips. Who reads me bedtime stories and makes chocolate chip pancakes on Sundays. Jameson nodded, understanding dawning. Elena Parker wasn't two separate people, the mother and the soldier. She was both simultaneously and completely. We're going to find her, he promised. I know, Sophia replied with absolute certainty. And whoever took her is going to regret it. The conviction in her voice sent a chill down Jameson's spine. This was no ordinary teenager. This was the daughter of Elena Parker, former Special Forces, current operative for a security organization that apparently had military-grade equipment and personnel at their disposal. And for the first time since he'd met Sophia Parker, Detective Jameson was very, very glad she was on his side. The tactical team moved like ghosts through the pre-dawn darkness, their silhouettes barely visible against the abandoned industrial complex. Detective Jameson followed Margaret Sterling, feeling distinctly out of place in the borrowed tactical gear that felt both too heavy and somehow insufficient. The bulletproof vest pressed uncomfortably against his chest as he struggled to keep up with Margaret's efficient pace. Remember the plan, Margaret's voice came through his earpiece. We're a reconnaissance team first. Confirm Elena's presence before we move to extraction. 4 other operatives spread out around the perimeter of the main facility park, covering the north entrance, a woman called Bishop on the east, and 2 others Jameson knew only as Larson and Mitchell securing escape routes. Margaret had explained their backgrounds in clipped, professional terms: former Special Forces, intelligence officers, combat specialists. People who moved in shadows and dealt in secrets. People like Elena Parker. Control, we're in position, Margaret reported. Beginning infiltration. From a converted van parked half a mile away, Sophia's calm voice responded. Copy that, Sterling. Thermal shows 8 heat signatures in the main building, concentrated in the northeast quadrant. No movement in the yard. Jameson was still processing the fact that a 17-year-old girl was running their tactical communications when Margaret signaled him forward. They approached a service entrance, its rusted door hanging partially open. Park appeared silently beside them, producing a small device that he ran along the doorframe. No electronic triggers, he reported. But there's a pressure plate just inside. He pointed to a nearly invisible disturbance in the dust on the floor. Amateur hour. Margaret nodded. They're not expecting company. Good for us. They stepped carefully over the pressure plate and entered the cavernous main floor of the factory. Ancient machinery loomed like prehistoric skeletons in the darkness, casting long shadows under the beams of their subdued tactical lights. The air smelled of rust, mildew, and something chemical that Jameson couldn't identify. Control, we're inside, Margaret whispered. Confirm locations. Heat signatures are 2 floors down, Sophia replied. Northeast section, what looks like former office spaces. Be advised, satellite imaging shows vehicle movement approaching from the south access road. Ada 3 minutes. Margaret's expression didn't change, but her eyes met Jameson's with increased urgency. We need to move faster. Park, find us a route down. As Park scouted ahead, Jameson moved closer to Margaret. If more hostiles are arriving, shouldn't we wait for backup? The FBI team could be here in. If we wait, they could move Elena or kill her. Margaret cut him off. We do this now. Park returned moments later. Found stairs. Clear path down, but there's activity below. Voices. They moved silently through the factory floor, passing abandoned workstations and collapsed conveyor systems. Jameson followed their lead, stepping exactly where they stepped, moving when they moved. Every instinct from his police training screamed that this was reckless, Unauthorized, potentially illegal, but the image of Sophia's face kept him moving forward. The stairwell was concrete, industrial, with metal steps that could easily betray their presence. Park went first, testing each step before committing his weight. Margaret followed, then Jameson, his service weapon feeling inadequate compared to the specialized tactical gear the others carried. On the first sublevel, they paused. Voices echoed from somewhere ahead, men speaking in low tones, the occasional laugh. Not the tense atmosphere Jameson would expect from terrorists holding a hostage. "Control, how many signatures on this level?" Margaret whispered. "2 heat signatures in what appears to be a break room 30 meters ahead," Sophia replied. "The main group is still 1 floor below you." Margaret signaled Park, who moved ahead with a silence that seemed impossible for a man his size. Moments later, his voice came through the comms. Guards confirmed. 2 males, armed with handguns and 1 shotgun. Casual posture, playing cards. Not professional security. "Neutralize quietly," Margaret ordered. Jameson opened his mouth to object police procedure, demanded identifying themselves, offering surrender, but before he could speak, Park had disappeared around the corner. 10 seconds later, he reappeared. "Clear," he reported. "They're taking a nap." Margaret moved forward, and Jameson followed, finding the 2 guards unconscious but breathing, their weapons secured, and their hands zip-tied behind their backs. "You didn't kill them," Jameson observed, surprised despite himself. Margaret gave him a look that bordered on contempt. "We're not murderers, detective. We're professionals. Now focus." The next stairwell led to the second sublevel, where the thermal imaging had shown the largest concentration of people. As they descended, the voices grew louder, more distinct. English with various accents. The discussion sounded like business, not threats or interrogation. 6 signatures in the main room, Sophia reported. 2 more in a smaller room, approximately 15 meters east. One of those signatures is stationary, possibly restrained. Elena, it had to be. Margaret gestured for them to hold position at the bottom of the stairs. The hallway ahead was dimly lit by emergency lighting, revealing a setup that looked more like a makeshift office than a terrorist hideout. Tables with computers, maps on walls, communication equipment. "I count 4 visible," Park whispered. 2 more must be in adjoining rooms. "Bishop status?" Margaret asked through the comms. "In position at East Emergency Exit," came the reply. "Mitchell and Larson have the vehicles ready. No movement from the approaching convoy yet, but they've entered the outer perimeter." Margaret turned to Jameson. "This is where it gets complicated. We need to neutralize the main group without alerting whoever's holding Elena. Based on the layout, she's being held in what was probably a storage room off the main area." "How do we do that?" Jameson asked. In answer, Margaret removed what looked like a small metal canister from her gear. "Non-lethal gas. Knocks them out for 20 minutes, no permanent damage. But we'll need masks." She distributed lightweight gas masks that fit snugly over their faces. The sensation was claustrophobic, but necessary. "On my mark," Margaret said, her voice muffled through the mask. "Park, you're with me for the main room. Jameson, once we engage, you find Elena. Get her out no matter what happens to us." "Understood?" The intensity in her eyes made it clear this wasn't a request. Jameson nodded. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Margaret rolled the canister into the main room while simultaneously drawing her weapon. Park moved with her, covering the far corner as the gas began to fill the space. Shouts of alarm quickly turned to coughing, then silence. Jameson followed their path, skirting the edges of the room where the gas was thinnest. Through his mask, he could see 6 men collapsed across desks and chairs, their weapons unfired beside them. These weren't street thugs. They wore expensive clothes, had the bearing of businessmen. Arms dealers, not terrorists. A shout from the eastern corridor refocused his attention. Margaret pointed urgently toward a door at the end of the hall, the room where Sophia had detected 2 heat signatures. Someone inside was now awake and aware of their presence. Jameson moved forward, his police training taking over as he positioned himself beside the door. It was locked from the inside, the knob unmoving under his gloved hand. "Police!" he shouted automatically. "Open the door." Silence, then a man's voice, accented but clear. "Go away. You have no jurisdiction here." "We know you have Elena Parker," Jameson called back. "Release her and surrender." A cold laugh responded. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This is bigger than a missing security consultant." Margaret appeared beside Jameson, her expression unreadable behind her mask. Without speaking, she handed him what looked like a small explosive charge. "Breaching device." She held up 3 fingers, counting down silently. At 0, Jameson placed the charge on the door lock and stepped back. The explosion was surprisingly contained, a sharp crack rather than a deafening blast, but effective. The door swung open. The room beyond was sparse, functional. A folding table, 2 chairs, and a figure bound to one of them. Elena Parker. She looked different from the professional photos Jameson had seen, her face bruised, hair matted with blood, clothing torn and dirty. But her eyes were alert, focused, and blazing with a cold fury that made Jameson step back involuntarily. Standing behind her, a pistol pressed to her temple, was a man in an expensive suit, his posture rigid with tension. "That's far enough," he said, his accent more pronounced under stress. "One more step and she dies." Margaret removed her mask, revealing her face to the man. "Hello, Kharkov. It's been a while." The man's eyes widened in recognition. "Sterling. Should have known you'd be involved. Your operative here has caused me considerable inconvenience." Elena's eyes flicked to Margaret, then to Jameson, assessing, calculating. Despite her injuries and the gun at her head, she didn't look afraid. She looked patient, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Let's not complicate this," Margaret said, her tone conversational. "You're surrounded. Your men are unconscious. The authorities are on their way. Release her, and perhaps we can reach an understanding." Kharkov sneered. "An understanding?" She's seen everything, the buyers, the merchandise, the shipment schedules. There's no understanding to be had. "Mom," Sophia's voice came through everyone's earpieces. "I've got control of the building's electrical system. Just say when." Elena's expression didn't change, but Jameson saw her fingers move slightly against her restraints, tapping what seemed like a pattern. "Your choice, Kharkov," Margaret continued, keeping the man's attention. "But consider that killing her ensures you never leave this room alive." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Then Elena spoke, her voice hoarse but steady. "Sophia, now." The lights went out, plunging the room into total darkness. A single gunshot cracked through the blackness, followed by a grunt and the sound of a body hitting the floor. Jameson reached for his flashlight, but before he could activate it, the lights returned. Kharkov lay unconscious on the ground, blood seeping from a shoulder wound. Elena was standing, free from her restraints, Margaret's backup pistol in her hand. "You had a gun?" Jameson blurted out. "No," Elena replied, her voice raspy. "Margaret always carries a secondary weapon in her left boot. Standard procedure when entering hostile territory." She swayed slightly, and Margaret moved to support her. "Status report," Elena demanded, professional even in her weakened state. "Facility secured," Margaret told her. "All hostiles neutralized. But we have incoming likely Kharkov's buyers. Extraction team is ready." Elena nodded, then noticed Jameson for the first time. "Detective. Jameson, isn't it?" You're the one who didn't believe my daughter." Jameson felt his face flush with embarrassment. "Miss Parker, Save it," she cut him off. "We need to move." As if to emphasize her point, Sophia's voice came through the comms again. "Convoy has arrived at the main entrance. 4 vehicles, approximately 12 individuals deploying. They're armed and moving tactically." Margaret helped Alina toward the door, but the injured woman pulled away, standing on her own despite obvious pain. "I can move. Where's my gear?" "Sophia has everything ready at the extraction point," Margaret assured her. They moved quickly back through the facility, stepping over the unconscious forms of Kharkov's men. Park had already disappeared, presumably to cover their escape route. Bishop's voice reported that the east exit remained clear. "Why didn't you just kill them?" Jameson asked as they hurried up the stairs. "Kharkov and his men, I mean." Elena glanced at him. "Dead men don't provide intelligence. And we need to know who's buying these weapons and where they're going. Plus," Margaret added dryly, "murder charges are harder to explain away than trespassing and assault." They reached the main floor just as shouts echoed from the south entrance. The buyers had found their unconscious business partners. "Move faster," Margaret ordered, and they broke into a run toward the east exit. Outside, the pre-dawn light was just beginning to break over the horizon. 3 black SUVs waited on a service road, engines running. Larson stood beside one, providing cover with what looked like a military-grade rifle. "Mom!" Sophia's voice came from the lead vehicle, and the teenager emerged, running toward Elena with a medical kit already open in her hands. The reunion wasn't what Jameson expected. No tears, no dramatic embrace. Sophia conducted a rapid clinical assessment of her mother's injuries, applying field dressings to the worst of them while speaking in clipped, professional terms about pulse rates and pupil dilation. "Mild concussion, 2 cracked ribs, multiple lacerations and contusions," Sophia reported to Margaret. "Nothing life-threatening, but she needs proper medical attention." "I'm right here," Elena pointed out, wincing as Sophia probed a particularly painful spot. "And I'll be fine." Gunshots rang out from the factory, prompting everyone to drop into defensive postures. Larson returned fire, providing cover as they scrambled toward the vehicles. "Time to go," Margaret announced. "Detective, you're with us." Jameson hesitated. "I should stay, explain to local authorities." "And tell them what?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite her injuries. "That you participated in an unauthorized operation with a private security team. That's the end of your career." She wasn't wrong. There was no way to explain what had happened here without implicating himself in multiple, potential violations of law and procedure. "The FBI will be here in 10 minutes, Margaret added. "They'll find Kharkov and his men, secure the weapons, make the necessary arrests. Your captain knows to keep your name out of the reports." More gunfire erupted from the factory entrance. Park appeared from the tree line, moving in a fighting retreat as he covered their escape. "Decision time, detective," Elena said, her eyes boring into his. "In or out?" Jameson looked at the chaos unfolding around him, at the professionals who had executed this rescue with precision and restraint, at Sophia attending to her mother's wounds with the competence of a combat medic. This wasn't his world, but he'd helped make it possible for Elena Parker to return to her daughter. "In," he said finally. "Let's go." They piled into the vehicles, Sophia never leaving her mother's side. As they pulled away, Jameson watched the factory recede in the rearview mirror, still trying to process everything he'd witnessed. "Why did you include me in this?" he asked Margaret, who was driving with calm precision despite the circumstances. "You didn't need a local detective for this operation." In the back seat, Elena answered instead. "Because you needed to see." "See what?" "That your assumptions were wrong," she said simply. "About me, about Sophia, about what women are capable of." Jameson had no response to that. She was right. He'd dismissed Sophia's concerns because he couldn't imagine a mother being what Elena Parker clearly was, a highly trained operative with combat experience and specialized skills. What happens now? He asked instead. Now we debrief, Margaret replied. Kharkov is part of a network supplying weapons to domestic extremist groups. The FBI has been tracking them for months. Elena found their distribution center and got captured trying to identify the buyers. Those men at the factory, they weren't terrorists. They were middlemen, Elena explained, her voice growing stronger as Sophia administered what looked like a military-grade stimulant injection. The real threat is who they're selling to. Domestic terrorist cells planning coordinated attacks on infrastructure targets. The convoy turned onto a main highway, blending with early morning traffic. No sirens pursued them. No helicopters appeared overhead. They had vanished as effectively as they had appeared. We'll drop you at a secure location, Margaret told Jameson. Your captain will contact you with a cover story for your absence. As far as anyone knows, you spent the night following up leads on a missing persons case. And what about you? Jameson asked Elena. Will you just go back to being a mom? Something like amusement flickered in Elena's battered face. I never stopped being a mom, detective. That's not a role I put on and take off. It's who I am, along with everything else. Sophia looked up from her medical supplies, meeting Jameson's eyes with the same intensity he'd seen in his office days earlier. People like you see those roles as separate. Motherhood in one box, warrior in another. But they're not separate for us. Us? Jameson echoed. Women, Elena clarified. We've always had to be everything at once. Nurturers and protectors. Healers and fighters. The world just hasn't always allowed us to show it. The vehicles turned off the highway onto a private road leading to what appeared to be an airfield. A sleek corporate jet waited on the tarmac, its engines already spinning up for departure. This is where we part ways, detective, Margaret announced as they pulled to a stop. Jameson nodded, understanding that he was glimpsing a world that would close to him as soon as he stepped out of the vehicle. But before he could open the door, Elena spoke again. When you dismissed my daughter, you didn't just disbelieve her. You taught her that authority figures, men in positions of power, won't take women seriously, even when they're telling the truth. Her words stung because they were accurate. He had dismissed Sophia, had smirked at her claims about her mother's background. I'm sorry, he said simply. Don't be sorry, Elena replied. Be better. The next time a woman or girl tells you something that doesn't fit your worldview, consider that the problem might be your worldview, not her truth. Sophia finished packing her medical supplies and looked up. And detective, thank you for coming today. For helping save my mom. The genuine gratitude in her voice made Jameson's throat tight. You're welcome. As he stepped out of the vehicle, Margaret handed him a card with a phone number. If you ever need to reach us. Emergencies only. The convoy departed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving Jameson standing alone at the edge of the airfield as the corporate jet taxied for takeoff. Within minutes, it was airborne, carrying Elena Parker and her team to wherever such people went between missions. Captain Reynolds was waiting in an unmarked car at the arranged pickup point, his expression unreadable as Jameson approached. Eventful night? He asked mildly. You could say that. Jameson settled into the passenger seat. You knew Elena Parker. Served with her. Reynolds nodded. She saved my life in Afghanistan, twice. When her daughter called me about the missing persons report, I knew something was wrong. Elena doesn't just disappear. Why didn't you tell me who she was? The captain pulled onto the road, heading back toward the precinct. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was exaggerating, the way you thought Sophia was? Jameson had no answer for that. There are women like Elena Parker all around us, Reynolds continued. Women who serve, who fight, who protect often without recognition or credit. Women whose capabilities we dismiss because we can't imagine them being both nurturers and warriors. As they drove through the awakening city, Jameson thought about Elena Parker and her daughter, about Margaret Sterling and her team, about all the assumptions he'd made throughout his career about what women could and couldn't do. "I'm going to be better," he said finally. Reynolds glanced at him. "Good, because there's a stack of cases on your desk, and I bet at least half of them would benefit from you seeing people as they really are, not as you expect them to be." As the sun broke fully over the horizon, Detective Jameson felt something shift in his understanding of the world. It wasn't just about women in combat roles or teenage girls with tactical training. It was about recognizing that all people contained multitudes, that the boxes society created were too small and too rigid for the complexity of real human beings. Elena Parker was a mother who made chocolate chip pancakes on Sundays. She was also a warrior who could escape restraints and neutralize an armed opponent in total darkness. Both were equally true, equally real. And Jameson had nearly failed to save her because he couldn't imagine both truths existing in the same person. Never again, he promised himself. Never again. 6 months after the events at Westridge Industrial Complex, Detective Jameson found himself sitting in an unfamiliar high school auditorium, surrounded by proud parents clutching cameras and flowers. He felt distinctly out of place in his suit and tie, the only person not clearly related to one of the graduates. But a promise was a promise. The principal's voice droned on about achievement and future potential as Jameson's mind drifted back to the case that had changed everything. The FBI had indeed arrived at the abandoned factory shortly after their departure, finding Kharkov and his men secured and waiting. The weapons cache, military-grade rifles and explosives intended for domestic terror cells was seized. The official reports made no mention of Sterling Security Solutions, Elena Parker, or Detective Michael Jameson. His attention snapped back to the present as the principal called Sophia Elena Parker. The teenager who walked across the stage bore little resemblance to the intense, desperate girl who had sat in his office 6 months earlier. This Sophia moved with quiet confidence, her smile genuine as she accepted her diploma. In the front row, Elena Parker stood and applauded, her face beaming with maternal pride. Elena had recovered from her injuries remarkably quickly. Within weeks, she had resumed what appeared to be a normal life, driving Sophia to school, attending parent-teacher conferences, volunteering for the senior class fundraiser. To anyone watching, she was simply another suburban mom, perhaps a bit more athletic than most, nothing more. But Jameson knew better. The occasional unexplained absence. The careful way she scanned every room she entered. The satellite phone she kept within reach at all times. Elena Parker lived in 2 worlds simultaneously, never fully belonging to either one. After the ceremony, Jameson waited at the designated meeting spot, a coffee shop 2 blocks from the school. He'd received the text that morning, graduation day. Beans and brews, 2 p.m., important information. No signature needed. Elena arrived precisely on time, dressed in a simple blue dress that concealed the fact that she could probably kill someone with her bare hands if necessary. She slid into the booth across from him, her movements fluid and economical. "Detective, thank you for coming." "Congratulations," he replied. Sophia looked happy up there. A genuine smile softened Elena's features. "She is. Accepted to Georgetown with a full scholarship. International Relations and Security Studies. Following in your footsteps? Creating her own path." Elena's expression grew serious. "But that's not why I asked you here." She placed a thin file on the table between them. 3 weeks ago, Kharkov's network was dismantled in a coordinated international operation. 37 arrests across 12 countries. The FBI is calling it one of the most successful counter-terrorism operations of the decade. Jameson nodded. He'd seen the headlines, though the details had been scarce. That's good news. It is. But there's more. Elena tapped the file. During interrogation, Kharkov revealed information about a separate operation. One that directly concerns your jurisdiction. Jameson felt a chill run down his spine. My jurisdiction? A shipment of weapons is coming through your port next week. Final destination unknown, but the buyers have connections to domestic extremist groups operating in 3 states. Why are you telling me this? Why not go through official channels? Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. Because official channels are compromised. Someone in federal law enforcement is facilitating these shipments. We don't know who. We? Jameson echoed. Sterling Security has been contracted by certain government agencies to operate. Parallel to official investigations. Deniable but effective. The implications were clear. Elena was offering him classified intelligence outside official channels. If he acted on it, he'd be operating without authorization. Again, this puts me in a difficult position, Jameson said carefully. I know. Elena's expression was unapologetic. But I trust you to do the right thing with this information. 6 months ago, you helped save my life despite your initial skepticism. You put aside your assumptions and focused on what mattered. And now you're asking me to do it again. I'm giving you a choice. She pushed the file closer. This contains everything you need: dates, shipping container numbers, contact protocols. What you do with it is up to you. Jameson stared at the file but didn't touch it. Why me? Why not work with the FBI agents you trust? Because sometimes the most effective approach isn't the most obvious one. Elena leaned forward. The people we're dealing with expect opposition from federal agencies. They've planned for it, infiltrated it. What they don't expect is a local detective who understands both procedural constraints and when to work around them. The compliment was unexpected, and Jameson had to admit, effective. In his 15 years on the force, he'd never been described as someone who worked around procedures. Until Elena Parker crashed into his life. What about Sophia? He asked. Does she know you're here? A hint of amusement crossed Elena's face. Sophia helped prepare the file. Her analytical skills are exceptional. She's 17, Jameson pointed out. Almost 18, Elena corrected. And she's been living in this world her entire life. I never hid the truth from her. I just made sure she had the skills to handle it. Jameson thought about his own daughter, away at college studying business management, blissfully unaware of the darker aspects of her father's work. He couldn't imagine involving her in something like this. That's a heavy burden to place on a child, he said carefully. Elena's expression hardened slightly. Do you think I didn't consider that? Every day since she was born, I've questioned whether I was doing the right thing. Whether I should have left the service, found a safer career, been just a mother instead of what I am. She looked away, gathering her thoughts. But pretending to be something I'm not wouldn't protect Sophia. It would just teach her that women have to choose, that we can be mothers or warriors, but never both. That authenticity must be sacrificed for safety. When she looked back at Jameson, her eyes were clear and certain. I chose to be honest. To show her that strength and nurturing aren't opposites. That she doesn't have to diminish herself to fit someone else's expectations. Jameson nodded slowly, beginning to understand. And she chose to follow your path. She chose her own path, Elena corrected again. One that includes all aspects of who she is and what she values. Just as I did. The detective looked at the file, still untouched between them. If I take this, what happens next? You review the information. Make your own assessment. If you decide to act on it, there's a secure number in there to request support if needed. From Sterling Security? Elena smiled slightly. Let's just say that resources can be made available. Jameson finally reached for the file, his decision made. I'll look it over. No promises beyond that. That's all I ask. Elena stood, preparing to leave. Sophia's waiting. We're having a celebration dinner. Wait, Jameson said. There's something I've been wanting to ask you. That night at the factory, you were tied up, injured, with a gun to your head. But when the lights went out, you were suddenly free and armed. How? Elena's smile turned enigmatic. Always be prepared to free yourself, detective. First rule of captivity. As she turned to go, Jameson had one more question. The person you shot, Kharkov, you aimed for his shoulder, not center mass. Why? She paused, looking back at him. Because killing is easy. Justice is harder. And I wanted him to face justice for his crimes, not just disappear. With that, she was gone, leaving Jameson alone with a file full of classified intelligence and a decision that could either advance or end his career. The Port Authority security office was quiet at 2 a.m., just the way Detective Jameson preferred it. Captain Reynolds stood beside him, reviewing the surveillance setup one last time. You're sure about this intel? Reynolds asked, not for the first time. As sure as I can be, Jameson replied, careful not to mention his source. Reynolds hadn't asked, which told Jameson everything he needed to know about the captain's own connections to Elena Parker and Sterling Security. After studying the file Elena had given him, Jameson had spent a week verifying what he could through legitimate channels. The ship was real, scheduled to dock in the early hours. The container numbers matched manifests declaring industrial equipment from a company that, upon deeper investigation, appeared to exist only on paper. Most convincingly, when he'd run background checks on the listed recipients, their names had triggered internal security flags that resulted in his access being temporarily suspended. Someone didn't want him looking too closely at these people. Port authorities cooperating fully, Reynolds said. Harbor police have 2 boats standing by. SWAT is on site but hidden. If this goes sideways, we've got overwhelming force ready to deploy. Jameson nodded, checking his tactical vest and service weapon for the 3rd time. And the feds? Reynolds' expression darkened. Officially, they're not involved. This is a local operation based on anonymous intelligence. And unofficially? Unofficially, I have 3 FBI agents I trust personally stationed as observers. If this is as big as your source suggests, they'll bring in their people once we've secured the evidence. It was a careful balancing act. If Elena was right about federal agencies being compromised, bringing them in too early could jeopardize the entire operation. But excluding them completely would create jurisdictional nightmares later. The radio crackled. Vessel is docking now. All units maintain position. On the monitors, they watched as the cargo ship eased into its berth. It was a mid-sized container vessel flying a Liberian flag common, enough that it wouldn't attract special attention among the dozens of ships that use the port daily. Docking procedures complete. Crane operators moving into position. The standard procedure would be to begin unloading containers immediately, working through the night to minimize the ship's time in port. But the particular containers they were interested in wouldn't be offloaded until regular dock workers had gone home. According to Elena's intelligence, a separate crew would arrive around 4 a.m. to handle the special cargo. Now we wait, Reynolds said, settling into a chair with a cup of coffee. Jameson remained standing, watching the monitors. Captain, can I ask you something about Elena Parker? Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Depends on what you're asking. How does she do it? Balance everything? The captain considered the question carefully. You're asking the wrong question, Jameson. It's not about balance. It's about integration. Meaning? Meaning Elena doesn't compartmentalize her life the way most people do. She doesn't stop being a warrior when she's making breakfast for Sophia, and she doesn't stop being a mother when she's in the field. It's all one life, lived authentically. Jameson thought about that as they waited, watching the ordinary activities of the port continue around them. Dock workers moved containers, paperwork was processed, vehicles came and went. Nothing suspicious yet. At 3:45 a.m., the radio came to life again. 3 vehicles approaching the south gate. Black SUV leading, followed by 2 unmarked vans. "That's them," Jameson said, straightening. "Right on schedule." Reynolds grabbed his radio. "All units prepare to move on my mark. Remember, we need to catch them in the act. Wait until the containers are opened and the contents verified." The vehicles passed through the security checkpoint with too much ease, Jameson noted. The guard barely glanced at their paperwork before waving them through. "Someone's been paid off," he muttered. "Focus on the big fish," Reynolds replied. "We can clean house later." They watched as the vehicles parked near the designated container staging area. 6 men emerged, all wearing the standard reflective vests and hard hats of dock workers, but their movements betrayed military training, precise, coordinated, constantly scanning their surroundings. "These aren't ordinary smugglers," Jameson observed. "No," Reynolds agreed. "Former military, maybe private contractors gone bad. The kind of people who know exactly what they're doing and who they're doing it for." The men approached a specific container that had been positioned at the edge of the staging area. One produced a set of keys, unlocking the heavy steel doors, while the others formed a loose perimeter, watching for any sign of trouble. On the surveillance monitors, Jameson could see the container doors swing open. 2 of the men climbed inside, emerging moments later with long, narrow crates. "Those are weapons cases," Reynolds said, reaching for his radio. "All units prepare to." A sudden burst of static interrupted him as all their communications simultaneously cut out. The surveillance monitors flickered, then went dark. "What the hell?" Reynolds tried the radio again. Nothing. "Signal jammer," Jameson realized. "They're scanning for surveillance." Without the benefit of their communications network, they had no way to coordinate with the other units positioned around the port. The operation was falling apart before it had even begun. "We need to move now," Reynolds decided, drawing his weapon, "before they finish loading and disappear." Jameson followed the captain out of the security office, moving quickly but quietly toward the container yard. They had lost the advantage of coordination, but they still had the element of surprise if they could get close enough before being spotted. Using the maze of containers for cover, they advanced toward the target area. Jameson could hear voices now, men talking in low tones, the sound of equipment being moved, the occasional metallic clank of weapons being handled. Reynolds signaled for Jameson to circle around to the right while he took the left, creating a pincer movement that would allow them to approach from 2 directions. It was a risky strategy with just 2 officers, but they had no choice. Jameson moved silently between the containers, drawing closer to the smugglers. He could see them now, still unloading crates from the container, working with the efficiency of professionals. One man stood slightly apart, talking on a satellite phone, clearly the leader of the operation. Jameson's earpiece crackled suddenly, startling him. A voice came through, not Reynolds, but a woman. "Detective Jameson, this is Bishop. Sterling security assets are in position to assist. Be advised, your SWAT team has been neutralized. Repeat, your backup is compromised." Jameson froze. Bishop, the woman who had been part of Elena's extraction team. She was here, which meant Sterling Security was monitoring the operation. "How did you?" he began, then stopped himself. Not the time for questions. "What's the situation?" 4 hostiles at your 2 o'clock, 3 at 9 o'clock. The leader is armed with a military-grade weapon under his jacket. Your captain is pinned down behind the blue container to your left. They don't know you're here yet." Jameson processed this information rapidly. What about Harbor Police? Their communications have been jammed as well. They believe the operation is postponed and are holding position. This was bad. Without backup, they were severely outgunned. But retreating meant losing the weapons shipment and any chance of identifying who was behind it. Sterling assets can provide support, Bishop continued. But we need your authorization as the senior law enforcement officer on scene. It was another line he would be crossing, accepting direct assistance from a private military company on American soil during a police operation. The legal implications were enormous, but so were the stakes. Authorized, Jameson said simply. What's the plan? Hold your position. Support incoming in 30 seconds. Before Jameson could ask what that meant, he noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. The dock lights, which had been harshly illuminating the entire area, began to dim one by one, plunging sections of the port into darkness. The smugglers noticed immediately, their voices rising in alarm. The leader barked orders, directing his men to finish loading the vans quickly. Then, with a final electrical hum, all the remaining lights went out simultaneously. The port was plunged into complete darkness. In the sudden blackness, Jameson heard the distinctive sound of suppressed weapons fire, followed by shouts of confusion from the smugglers. Night vision goggles, he realized. Sterling's people were using the darkness to their advantage. Detective now, Bishop's voice commanded in his ear. Move to your 3 o'clock, 15 meters. Secure the leader. Working on instinct and the faint outlines he could see, Jameson moved in the indicated direction. More suppressed shots echoed through the darkness, followed by the sound of bodies hitting the ground. A flare suddenly illuminated the scene, thrown by one of the smugglers in a desperate attempt to counter their attackers. In its harsh red glow, Jameson saw figures moving with military precision through the container yard. Sterling's operators, taking down the smugglers with ruthless efficiency. The leader was making a break for one of the SUVs, a large metal case clutched in one hand, a pistol in the other. Jameson intercepted him, using the shipping containers for cover as he closed the distance. "Police, drop your weapons!" he shouted, his service weapon aimed at the man's chest. The smuggler spun toward him, raising his pistol. Jameson fired twice, center mass. The man crumpled to the ground, the metal case clattering beside him. The flare sputtered out, returning the scene to darkness. Jameson approached cautiously, keeping his weapon trained on the fallen smuggler. As he reached for the case, a hand gripped his shoulder. "Not that one," a familiar voice said. "This one." Elena Parker materialized beside him, holding a different case. She was dressed in tactical gear, her face partially obscured by a balaclava pulled down around her neck. "What are you doing here?" Jameson demanded, though he already knew the answer. "Ensuring mission success," she replied simply. "This case contains the real prize, not weapons, but targeting data. Locations, security details, personnel information for potential domestic targets. Exactly what these people need to plan their attacks. Why didn't you tell me? Need to know basis, detective. And now you know." She handed him the case. "This needs to go directly to your captain, then to the FBI agents he trusts. No one else." Around them, the operation was concluding with surprising speed. Sterling's operators had subdued or neutralized all the smugglers. The weapons were being secured, evidence preserved. In the distance, Jameson could hear sirens as Harbor Police finally responded to the situation. "Your team will disappear before they arrive," Jameson guessed. Elena nodded. "We were never here." This was a successful police operation based on anonymous intelligence. Captain Reynolds will corroborate that story. "And if I decide to tell the truth?" She looked at him directly, her expression serious but not threatening. "You won't, not because you're afraid or compromised, but because you understand what's at stake. These weapons were destined for people who want to cause mass casualties on American soil. Stopping them matters more than procedural purity. Jameson knew she was right. The complexity of modern threats sometimes required approaches that existed in gray areas, not because the ends justified any means, but because rigid adherence to procedure could cost innocent lives. The FBI agents Reynolds trusts, Jameson said. They're connected to Sterling, aren't they? Let's just say there are people in every agency who understand that sometimes official channels are too slow or too compromised to be effective. People who prioritize protection over politics. The lights began to come back on throughout the port, section by section. When Jameson looked around, Elena and her team had vanished as if they'd never been there. All that remained were subdued smugglers, secured weapons, and the case in his hands. Captain Reynolds approached, looking remarkably composed despite the chaos of the past few minutes. Situation contained. Harbor police are securing the perimeter. The FBI observers are en route. Did you know? Jameson asked quietly. About Sterling's involvement? Reynolds didn't answer directly. I knew we needed to succeed tonight. The details of how that happened are less important than the result. He nodded at the case. Is that what I think it is? According to my source, it contains targeting data. Potential attack locations. Then we need to get it somewhere secure immediately. Reynolds took the case. Good work tonight, Detective. You made the right calls under difficult circumstances. As they walked back toward the security office, Jameson reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. The detective who had dismissed Sophia Parker's concerns about her missing mother would never have authorized a private security company to assist in a police operation. He wouldn't have understood that sometimes protection required flexibility, adaptation, and the courage to step outside conventional boundaries. Elena Parker had taught him that lesson, not just through her words, but through her example. She moved seamlessly between worlds that most people considered separate and incompatible. Mother and warrior. Nurturer and protector. Conventional and extraordinary. And in doing so, she made those around her question their own limitations, their own self-imposed boundaries. She challenged them to be more complete versions of themselves, not by denying any aspect of their identity, but by embracing all of them simultaneously. As the first light of dawn broke over the port, Jameson made a silent promise to remember that lesson. To see people as they truly were, not as he expected them to be. To recognize that the most effective protectors were often those who understood both strength and compassion, both procedure and improvisation. The people who, like Elena Parker, refused to be diminished by others' expectations, and instead created their own, more expansive definition of who they could be. 1 year after the port operation, the Georgetown University campus buzzed with the nervous energy of Family Weekend. Parents streamed through the historic gates, armed with care packages and eager smiles, ready to see how their children had transformed in their first semester away from home. Detective Michael Jameson stood awkwardly at the edge of the quad, feeling out of place among the academic buildings and affluent families. His own daughter had chosen a state school closer to home, making this his first visit to the prestigious campus. But a promise was a promise, and when Sophia Parker had called to invite him to her presentation, he'd found himself unable to refuse. The National Security Studies auditorium was smaller than he'd expected, filled with serious-looking students and a smattering of parents who carried themselves with military bearing. Jameson took a seat in the back row, scanning the room out of professional habit. His gaze paused on a familiar figure sitting 3 rows ahead, Elena Parker, dressed in civilian clothes that nonetheless couldn't quite disguise her alertness, her readiness. As if sensing his attention, Elena turned slightly, acknowledging him with a subtle nod before returning her focus to the front of the room. The moderator, a distinguished professor with silver hair and an impressive collection of security credentials listed in the program, approached the podium. Welcome to our undergraduate symposium on emerging threats in domestic security. Our first presenter is a first-year student whose analysis of adaptive response protocols has already caught the attention of several faculty members. Please welcome Sophia Parker. Sophia approached the podium with the same controlled confidence Jameson remembered from their first meeting. Her presentation was poised, articulate, and surprisingly technical, a detailed analysis of how law enforcement agencies could better coordinate with private security contractors during domestic terror incidents. The traditional barriers between public and private security sectors create dangerous gaps in our response capabilities, she explained, her slides showing statistics on response times and coordination failures. By developing formalized protocols for temporary integration of specialized private assets, we can leverage expertise without compromising legal oversight. As Jameson listened, he realized Sophia wasn't just theorizing. She was describing exactly what had happened at the port, the careful dance between official law enforcement and Sterling Securities operatives. She had transformed their real-world experience into an academic framework that might actually change how agencies responded to complex threats. The most remarkable part was how she managed to make these revolutionary ideas sound reasonable, even obvious. Like her mother, Sophia had a gift for moving between worlds in this case, between practical field experience and academic theory. After the presentation and a round of insightful questions, the audience dispersed for a reception in the adjacent atrium. Jameson hung back, unsure if he should approach Elena and Sophia or simply leave. The decision was made for him when Sophia spotted him and waved him over to where she stood with her mother. "Detective Jameson," she greeted him warmly. "Thank you for coming. What did you think?" "Impressive," he said honestly. "Though I'm pretty sure some of those theoretical scenarios weren't entirely theoretical." Elena smiled slightly. Sophia has a talent for extracting valuable lessons from real-world experiences while maintaining appropriate discretion. "Mom," Sophia rolled her eyes with the universal teenage exasperation that reminded Jameson she was, despite everything, still a normal 18-year-old in some ways. "Detective Jameson already knows what we do." "What we did," Elena corrected gently. "You're focused on your studies now." Something in her tone caught Jameson's attention. "You're not with Sterling Security anymore?" "I've taken a sabbatical," Elena replied carefully, "to focus on family matters." Before Jameson could process what that might mean, they were interrupted by the silver-haired professor who had moderated the symposium. "Miss Parker, your daughter's work is extraordinary," he said, shaking Elena's hand. "Her understanding of operational dynamics suggests practical experience well beyond her years." "Thank you, Professor Harrington," Elena replied smoothly. "Sophia has always taken an interest in my security consulting work." The professor nodded knowingly, then turned to Jameson. "And you are?" "Detective Michael Jameson," he introduced himself. "Just a family friend." "Detective Jameson is being modest," Sophia interjected. "He's one of the officers who helped pioneer the integrated response protocols I discussed in my presentation." Professor Harrington's interest visibly increased. "Is that so? We're always looking for practitioners to share real-world perspectives with our students. Perhaps you'd consider giving a guest lecture someday." The suggestion caught Jameson off guard. Him lecturing at Georgetown? To students who probably had twice his education and connections he could only dream of. Before he could formulate a polite refusal, Elena spoke. "Detective Jameson has valuable insights on overcoming institutional barriers during crisis response. Our students would benefit from his perspective." The professor nodded. "Excellent. My assistant will contact you to arrange details." With that, he moved on to greet other attendees. "You didn't have to do that," Jameson said when the professor was out of earshot. "Yes, she did," Sophia countered. "Your experience is exactly what these students need to hear. Most of them have never seen how theory meets reality in the field. Elena checked her watch. We should go. We have dinner reservations at 7. Would you like to join us, Detective? Sophia asked. The invitation surprised him. I wouldn't want to intrude on your family time. You wouldn't be, Elena assured him. In fact, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. Something that might interest you professionally. Intrigued, Jameson accepted. 30 minutes later, they were seated at a quiet table in an upscale Georgetown restaurant, the kind of place where conversations remained private and the clientele understood discretion. After they ordered, Elena got straight to the point. How do you feel about your current position, Detective? My position? Jameson was caught off guard by the directness of the question. Are you satisfied with the scope and impact of your work? He considered the question carefully. The past year had been productive. The port operation had led to multiple arrests and the disruption of a significant weapons trafficking network. He'd received a commendation and was being considered for promotion to lieutenant. And yet, I'm proud of what we accomplished, he said finally. But sometimes I feel constrained by jurisdictional limitations, bureaucratic procedures. There are threats that don't fit neatly into traditional law enforcement categories. Elena nodded as if he'd confirmed something she already suspected. That's why I wanted to speak with you. I'm establishing a new division within Sterling Security, a liaison unit specifically designed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and private security resources. Jameson blinked, processing her words. You said you were on sabbatical. From field operations, Elena clarified. This is more administrative, strategic. And where do I fit into this? Elena placed a business card on the table between them. I need someone who understands both worlds. Someone with law enforcement credibility who also recognizes when conventional approaches are insufficient. Someone who can help agencies understand when and how to utilize specialized resources without compromising their legal mandate. Jameson stared at the card. It was elegant, understated simply his name and a title, Director of Law Enforcement Liaison. You want me to leave the police force? He asked, though he already knew the answer. I want you to expand your impact, Elena replied. The threats we're facing, domestic terrorism, cyber attacks, infrastructure targeting, they're evolving faster than traditional agencies can adapt. We need people who can create new pathways for collaboration, who can navigate the space between public and private security without getting lost in it. Sophia, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Think about the port operation, Detective. What made it successful wasn't just good police work or Sterling's resources. It was the integration of both, the way you and my mother found a way to work together despite all the reasons you shouldn't have been able to. Jameson picked up the card, turning it over in his fingers. This is a big step. I've been in law enforcement my entire career. And you'd still be serving that mission, Elena assured him. Just from a different angle. Sometimes the most effective protection happens at the edges of the system, not at its center. As the waiter brought their appetizers, Jameson tucked the card into his jacket pocket. I'll think about it. Elena nodded, not pressing further. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, Sophia's adjustment to college life, the challenges of her coursework, her plans for the upcoming semester. Watching them interact, Jameson was struck again by the seamless way they moved between discussing national security, theory, and normal mother-daughter concerns about roommates and dining hall food. After dinner, they walked through the historic Georgetown streets, the autumn evening crisp and clear. Sophia excused herself to meet friends for a study session, leaving Jameson and Elena strolling along the Potomac waterfront. She's remarkable, Jameson said, watching Sophia disappear into the crowd of students. You've raised an extraordinary young woman. Thank you, Elena replied simply. It hasn't always been easy. There were times I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, exposing her to the realities of my work. But you didn't shield her. No, I prepared her instead. Elena's gaze followed the river's dark current. When I left the military, many of my colleagues thought I was throwing away my career to be a mother. When I continued working in security, others accused me of being a bad mother for putting my daughter at risk. She turned to face Jameson directly. The truth is, I never saw it as a choice between two separate lives. Being a warrior made me a better mother, more protective, more strategic about threats, more focused on preparing Sophia for the real world. Being a mother made me a better warrior, giving me something profound to fight for, a reason to come home safely, a perspective that went beyond the mission. Jameson nodded, understanding dawning. Integration, not balance. Exactly. Elena smiled, pleased that he remembered their previous conversation. Most people spend their lives trying to balance competing aspects of their identity, never realizing that the conflict is artificial, that they don't have to choose. They reached a bench overlooking the river and sat in companionable silence for a moment. Jameson found himself reflecting on his own career, his own compartmentalized approach to life. Work stayed at work. Family concerns remained separate. Professional ethics operated in a different sphere from personal values. "The job you're offering," he said finally. "Would I be working directly with you? With me, with Sophia when she's on academic breaks, with a team of specialists we're assembling. People who understand that the lines between public and private security are becoming increasingly blurred, and that we need new approaches to address emerging threats. And Sterling Security is willing to create an entire division just for this?" Elena's expression turned serious. "The intelligence we gathered from the port operation confirmed what we've suspected for some time. Domestic extremist groups are becoming more sophisticated, more coordinated, and more ambitious in their targeting. Traditional law enforcement isn't equipped to counter these threats alone. Neither are private security contractors. We need integration, not just cooperation." Jameson thought about the targeting data they'd recovered, the planned attacks that had been thwarted. The stakes were real and growing. "I'd need time to think about it," he said finally. "To talk with my family, consider the implications." "Of course. The offer remains open." Elena stood, signaling that their conversation was concluding. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that your actions a year ago made a difference. Not just in stopping that particular threat, but in demonstrating what's possible when we move beyond conventional limitations." As they walked back toward the campus, Jameson found himself seeing Georgetown and Sophia Parker with new eyes. This prestigious institution, with its stone buildings and ivy-covered walls, represented one kind of power and influence. Elena, with her combat skills and strategic mind, represented another. Yet she moved through these academic spaces with the same confidence she'd displayed in tactical operations, refusing to be limited by others' expectations of where she belonged. "One last question," Jameson said as they reached the campus gates. "When we first met, I dismissed your daughter's concerns because I couldn't imagine someone being both a mother and a special forces operator. I couldn't see past my own preconceptions." Elena waited, sensing there was more. "How do you deal with that? With people underestimating you, putting you in boxes that don't fit?" She considered the question thoughtfully. "I don't waste energy trying to change their minds directly. I simply proceed with my mission, whatever it may be. Results speak louder than explanations. Like when you rescued those 20 soldiers despite direct orders not to engage." Elena's expression sharpened. "Sophia told you about that. She mentioned it when explaining your military background. I got the impression it was a defining moment." "It was." Elena's voice grew distant, as if seeing a scene from years ago. "I had a clear shot at an enemy sniper who was systematically eliminating American soldiers. My commanding officer ordered me to maintain observation, only not because it was tactically sound, but because he didn't believe women should be in combat roles." "So you took the shot anyway?" "I did." Saved 20 lives and ended my military career in the process. Her expression showed no regret. They court-martialed me for insubordination, reduced me to private, and discharged me. The official record called it a failure to follow orders. I call it refusing to let men die because of someone else's outdated beliefs. Jameson tried to imagine the courage that decision had required, weighing her entire career against the lives of fellow soldiers, knowing the likely consequences. Is that why you founded Sterling Security? To operate without those kinds of constraints? Partly, Elena acknowledged. But also to create a space where effectiveness matters more than conformity. Where people are judged by their capabilities, not their categories. They reached the visitor parking area where Jameson had left his car. Before they parted, Elena extended her hand. Think about the offer, detective. Not just as a career move, but as a chance to redefine what's possible in your field. As he drove home that night, the business card seemed to burn in Jameson's pocket, representing not just a job opportunity, but a fundamental reorientation of how he understood his role in protecting others. Sophia Parker had shown him that the most effective protectors weren't always those who followed conventional paths, but those who forged new ones when necessary. 2 weeks later, Jameson sat in Captain Reynolds' office, resignation letter in hand. The captain read it silently, his expression unreadable. "Sterling Security," Reynolds said finally, looking up. "Sophia Parker's outfit." "Yes, sir. She's establishing a law enforcement liaison division. Wants me to head it up." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, studying Jameson carefully. "You know, when I first met Sophia Parker, she'd just been discharged from the Army for insubordination. Brilliant tactician, exceptional marksman, absolutely committed to protecting American lives, and completely unwilling to let bureaucracy or outdated thinking get in the way of that mission." "Sounds familiar," Jameson commented. "She was right, by the way, about the orders she disobeyed. I was one of the soldiers in that courtyard. Would have died if she hadn't taken that shot." Reynolds' expression turned reflective. "Sometimes the system gets it wrong. Sometimes the people who best serve the mission are the ones willing to question how it's being executed." He picked up the resignation letter. "I'll process this, but know that you'll always have a place here if things don't work out." "Thank you, sir, for everything." As Jameson stood to leave, Reynolds added, "And Jameson? Tell Elena I said to teach you that thing with the restraints. Useful skill in our line of work." 3 months later, Detective now Director Michael Jameson stood before a joint task force of federal agents, local law enforcement officers, and private security specialists. The conference room at Sterling Security's headquarters hummed with skepticism and curiosity in equal measure. Traditional boundaries between public and private security create vulnerabilities that our adversaries are increasingly exploiting, Jameson began, echoing Sophia's presentation from months earlier. "Our goal isn't to replace existing structures, but to create integrated response protocols that leverage the strengths of both sectors." As he outlined the new liaison program, Jameson caught Alana's eye from where she stood at the back of the room. Her slight nod conveyed approval without words, the subtle acknowledgement of a mission proceeding as planned. This was his new role, building bridges between worlds that had long operated in isolation, helping others see beyond their preconceptions about what was possible and who could be trusted. It wasn't the path he'd envisioned when he first pinned on a badge 15 years earlier, but it was the path that would allow him to have the greatest impact in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. After the presentation, as the task force members broke into smaller discussion groups, Elena approached. "Well done," she said simply. "You're a natural at this." "I had a good teacher," Jameson replied. "Someone who showed me that the most effective protection happens when we refuse to be limited by other people's expectations." Elena smiled, not the controlled, professional expression she usually maintained, but something warmer, more genuine. Integration, not balance. Exactly. Jameson gestured toward the diverse group of professionals now engaged in animated discussion about how they might work together. This is just the beginning, isn't it? Of a new approach to security? Yes. Elena's expression turned serious. The threats are evolving. So must we. As they moved to join the discussions, Jameson reflected on how far he'd come from that first meeting with Sophia Parker in his office. He'd dismissed her concerns because he couldn't imagine her mother being both a nurturer and a warrior. He couldn't see beyond the artificial boundaries society created to separate roles that were, in reality, deeply connected. Elena Parker had shattered those boundaries, not through explanation or argument, but through decisive action. By simply being who she was fully, unapologetically, effectively, she had forced others to expand their understanding of what was possible, of who could be trusted with society's most critical missions. And in doing so, she had shown Jameson a truth that extended far beyond questions of gender or profession, that the most powerful protection came from those who refused to diminish any aspect of themselves to fit others' expectations, who integrated rather than balanced, who recognized that sometimes the most important rules to follow were not those written in manuals, but those etched in our deepest understanding of right and wrong. It was a lesson he would carry forward in his new role, helping others see beyond their preconceptions, to recognize allies and capabilities they might otherwise overlook. Building new pathways for collaboration in a world where threats respected no boundaries and protection required constant adaptation. Not because the rules didn't matter, but because sometimes protecting what mattered most required the courage to move beyond them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.